Barack Obama gave his 2011 State of the Union address. I did a few interviews beforehand. I was on RT's The Alona Show. You can find it on our YouTube channel. I was also on with our One Ohio affiliate, WDCM, doing a post-game analysis. Also have an op-ed up on davidpakman.com. My thoughts are this, and I don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time on the State of the Union, as important as it is, because as we've heard from Scott Keeter from the Pew Research Center, the effect of the State of the Union is basically always the same. Nobody really remembers State of the Unions too much later, although they can affect the next year or two of campaigning for sure. We're about to start a re-election campaign here for Obama. So there's usually a few point bump, and that's that. It started off basically like every other address with my count was 5 minutes of applause and standing. Where it immediately diverged was after Joe Biden then introduced the President of the United States. Normally there is several more minutes of applause that follows, and Barack Obama cut it short, asking people to sit after 16 seconds. I was happy about that. I didn't want to stay up any later than I had to. Now, my total count was 81 applauses, 27 of which had standing ovations. There was only one that was a Republican-only applause that I saw. There were 17 Democrat-only applauses and then 53 bipartisan, for lack of a better term. I think that the mixed seating that some of the people took part in put a damper on the applause lines because, and in a good way, because normally I think people just look to who's next to them. If you were next to someone from the opposite party, you kind of have to look all the way around to see, are your guys clapping? And it's sad that that's what it is, but in a way, it definitely cut down on the applause lines. It caused some awkward where you hear just one person or two people clapping and then it dies down. The speech. The first part of the speech, as a speech, in other words, how was it written, I thought was excellent. The second part, not so good. Even the special, human interest stories that are usually in towards the end. I remember George W. Bush crying during one, very emotional, talking about, I believe, a soldier who was up in the First Lady's box. Did not go so well for Obama. And I don't know, I think part of it is it wasn't that well written. Part of it was just kind of a weird mood in general. The biggest positive for me was energy. I mean, we've been talking for years on the show about Bush didn't want to be the energy guy. Barack Obama so far has not really shown a commitment. And Barack Obama said very clearly, 1 million electric vehicles by 2015 is a goal. 80% of our electricity from clean energy by 2035. That's a specific, measurable goal. Now, is there a history of keeping to State of the Union promises? No. I did a bunch of research in the last couple of days, and there's a long history of making promises during State of the Unions. And this wasn't a promise. This was something he would like to aspire to. Promises that aren't kept. And he wants to eliminate oil company subsidies, something which John Boehner, as he looked orange and he looked like he was going to cry, but he did not clap about the oil subsidies when Barack Obama suggested removing those. And I agree with Obama on this. They both don't need them. The oil companies don't need those subsidies. And it's antithetical to the growth of alternative energy. Now, BP will say, well, it's beyond petroleum. It's no longer British petroleum. They will actually help develop that. We all know that I don't think in the interim, until we really have a less favorable oil situation, that BP is really going to do anything to get people off of oil. Although their PR campaigns will tell you they are doing that. I have to say, on some other fronts, I can't help but think that the president is living in a fantasy world. And this was, number one, when he talked about high-speed rail in the U.S., twice as fast as a car, faster than an airplane for some trips, and just mentions it in passing as if it's just going to happen. The airline, automobile, and oil lobbies are not going to let that happen. That's abundantly clear. And also part of the fantasy world to me was the entire first 4 minutes of the speech was almost exclusively dedicated to bipartisanship. It was well written. He delivered it nicely, but he is living in a fantasy world in the sense that all of the bipartisanship talk, and I've written a piece about this a few months ago, all the bipartisanship talk that we heard for the first 2 years of his presidency went nowhere. In fact, bipartisanship, his efforts at bipartisanship did not help him get anything through, and in fact almost derailed some of the few things he did get through. So I really hope that I hate to say it, I hope that that's only fluff, and that bipartisanship is not going to be his focus in the next 2 years. Returning to the positive stuff, infrastructure. Infrastructure has not been a focus of the United States for longer than I've lived in this country. So if we are actually going to start putting money into infrastructure, I think that that makes sense. And here's my real concern. While I like the idea of spending $78 billion less on the military and the idea of reducing some of that spending, I don't want my audience to confuse, and I doubt they would because I've made this point clearly. We're going to be doing less war, essentially. So naturally, some of the war costs will go down. This does not mean that we are moving away from the war obsession from the military-industrial complex and actually closing bases. And we'll talk more about this. So don't be confused about that. It was positive, but I don't want people to get the impression that this is actually a change in the military-industrial complex. Winning the future was a term that was used. To me, that was a lowlight. Obama said, the future is not a gift, but it's an achievement. Repeatedly saying winning the future to me makes it sound like it's a game, and I didn't think that the future was that either. Only mention of don't ask, don't tell or gay rights was immediately followed by a wholesale endorsement of letting military recruiters on all college campuses. I don't like that. It's horrible that the only mention of a significant piece of legislation, which still hasn't even been enacted, by the way. So if you want military recruiters on because of the don't ask, don't tell repeal, let's wait till that's enacted. That was disappointing to me. Overall, some completely unbelievable claims were made. He will not sign any bill that comes to his desk with earmarks. We've heard that from politicians on all sides of the aisle. I don't believe that that's the case. I think it's a claim he couldn't possibly back up. I just don't believe it. But some positives. For me, energy and at least some reduction in military spending, albeit not a real reduction.